A Muslim man attacked a Virgin Mary procession in Colorado, but witnesses say something impossible stopped him. What happened next would shake an entire town and America to its core. Hello, viewer. Thank you for being here. Leave a like and comment where you're watching from. Now stay with this story, because what happened on September 14th, 2025 is something hundreds of people still struggle to explain. The sun was sinking behind the jagged skyline of the Rocky Mountains, painting the small town of Marion Springs, Colorado, in a warm, golden glow. It should have been a peaceful evening, one of the most cherished nights of the year when thousands of pilgrims gathered for the annual candlelight procession honoring the Virgin Mary. For more than a century, Marion Springs had been a place where people came searching for healing, direction, or just one moment of peace in their chaotic lives. The streets were lined with shops selling candles, rosaries, and small bottles meant to hold holy water drawn from the spring behind the chapel. Visitors walked slowly through the narrow lanes, feeling something sacred in the air. Even those who weren't Catholic often said the town had a strange calm to it, as if faith itself hung from the pine-scented breeze drifting down from the Rockies. By late afternoon, volunteers were already setting up lanterns along the stone paths. Choir members warmed their voices behind the basilica. Elderly pilgrims in wheelchairs were carefully positioned near the front so they wouldn't be pushed in the nighttime crowds. Families held their candles close, waiting for the first spark of flame to travel from hand to hand, turning the darkness into a river of light. Everything looked normal. Everything felt safe. But beneath the calm, something else was moving toward Marion Springs, something no one saw coming. A young man, driven by anger and convinced he had a mission, was about to collide with centuries of devotion. And the moment he stepped into that procession, the boundary between the physical and the spiritual, between what people believe and what they think is impossible, would be shattered. This is not folklore. This is not a campfire myth. This is what dozens of witnesses, from teenagers to elderly cancer patients, swore they saw with their own eyes. And before this night was over, the name Marion Springs would be known across America. If you want to hear what really happened next and why so many people believe the Virgin Mary intervened, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Touched by Mary, so you never miss these powerful stories of faith and miracles. Marion Springs had always lived in two worlds at once: the quiet rhythms of a small Colorado town and the constant heartbeat of a national pilgrimage site. On ordinary weekdays, it looked like any rural community nestled against the Rocky Mountains, children biking down Main Street, ranch trucks rolling past old diners, and the sound of wind brushing through the pines. But during pilgrimage season, everything changed. The town of barely 12,000 swelled with visitors from every corner of America. Hotels filled, restaurants overflowed, and the stone paths leading to the Virgin Mary Shrine glowed nightly under rivers of candlelight. For many residents, the procession wasn't just tradition, it was the lifeline of the local economy. Lifelong shop owner Grace Whitaker, who sold candles and rosaries at her family store, often said Marion Springs wouldn't last a year without the pilgrims. Taxi drivers, cooks, street vendors, everyone depended on the millions who came seeking healing or hope. But beneath the serenity, a newer social tension had quietly taken root. Over the past decade, immigration reshaped the region. Marion Springs became home to a growing Muslim community. American-born families, small business owners, students, mechanics, people who lived peacefully but carried their own history, their own struggles to belong in a conservative, faith-centered town. Most days, coexistence worked. Churches held their masses. The small mosque on Willow Street operated quietly, its members attending Friday prayers and then sharing coffee at the same cafes as Catholic parishioners. High school students played on the same football team, their differences almost invisible. Almost. Because in moments like the annual procession, lines felt sharper. Some Muslim residents saw the massive public devotion as overwhelming, a reminder that this was not culturally their space. Meanwhile, lifelong Catholics viewed the procession as sacred, untouchable, an expression of identity far deeper than tourism or ceremony. Still, both sides maintained a respectful distance, aware that in a town so small, peace depended on it. Yet that peace was fragile. One resident, a local firefighter, once remarked, "All it takes is one spark in the wrong place." On the evening of September 14th, that spark was already on its way, driven up the mountain highway by a man convinced that the procession was not a prayer but a provocation. And when he arrived, Marion Springs would learn just how thin the line was between coexistence and conflict. Long before his name would echo through Marion Springs, Omar Haddad was just another Colorado kid growing up on the edges of Denver. Neighbors remembered M as the boy who spent summer afternoons tossing a football across the apartment courtyard, laughing with friends, wearing a Broncos jersey 2 sizes too big. His teachers described M as quiet but polite, the kind of student who blended into the background but never caused trouble. His parents, immigrants from Morocco, ran a small grocery store, working long hours to build the American life they had dreamed of. For most of his childhood, Omar lived between 2 identities without conflict. At home, his mother taught him the prayers of their faith. At school, he spoke English like any other American kid. He joined the football team in middle school, learned to grill burgers with his friends, and celebrated both Ramadan and the 4th of July with the same innocent enthusiasm. But something shifted in his early 20s after a series of disappointments that seemed to hit all at once. The part-time job that never became full-time, the college classes he dropped because they felt pointless, the feeling that he was moving while everyone else his age was rising. Those who knew IM say that was the season when frustration began to curdle into resentment. He started spending more time alone, first quietly, then obsessively on online forums where anger was dressed as purpose and conspiracy was preached as truth. Algorithms fed him a steady stream of content, claiming Christians were attacking Islam, claiming America was at war with his identity. Slowly, subtly, Omar began to believe he had been wronged by a world that didn't see him. His posts changed. His tone hardened. He no longer talked about football or job plans, but about standing up, fighting back, and rejecting idolatry. Friends tried to check on him, but he waved them away. His parents noticed he prayed more intensely, but also grew angrier. It wasn't devotion. They sensed it was fear wrapped in fury. By the summer of 2025, Omar had withdrawn completely into a worldview built on grievance. And when news of the Marion Springs procession reached him, thousands of Christians celebrating the Virgin Mary in the open, he didn't see a tradition. He saw a threat he convinced himself he had been called to confront. September 14th, 2025, began like any other late summer day in Denver, but those closest to Omar Haddad would later say something felt different about him that morning. His neighbor, an elderly veteran who often saw Omar heading to odd construction shifts, noticed he left his apartment unusually early, shoulders tense, face set with a strange, determined focus. It was the kind of expression a man wears when he has already made up his mind. For weeks, Omar had tracked the schedule of the Marion Springs candlelight procession. At first, it was idle curiosity, the way people scroll through local events, but soon it became an obsession. The idea grew inside him like a spark catching dry grass. Thousands of Christians publicly honoring the Virgin Mary, an act he had convinced himself was idolatry flaunted in the open. By sunrise, that spark had become a purpose. Omar drove his aging pickup truck along the interstate toward the mountains, the radio off, his thoughts looping through the same rhetoric he'd absorbed online. Each mile seemed to stiffen his resolve. To him, this wasn't an act of violence. It was a stand he believed someone had to take. Just before reaching Marion Springs, he stopped at a hardware store on the outskirts of town. Security cameras later showed M moving quietly through the aisles, selecting items that, on their own, appeared harmless. A metal pipe, heavy-duty tape, a small tool bag. The cashier remembered M only because he avoided eye contact and paid in cash, as though in a hurry to get somewhere important. Once back in his truck, Omar assembled what he believed he needed. No one in the parking lot noticed. No one suspected that the man tightening a roll of tape around a metal bar was preparing something far more dangerous than a simple repair. Meanwhile, in Marion Springs, volunteers placed lanterns along the procession route. Children practiced holding their candles. Choir members rehearsed harmonies in the basilica courtyard. Across town, a bakery owner boxed up extra loaves for pilgrims who had traveled long distances. Life moved gently, unaware of the storm approaching. As the afternoon light faded into the soft orange glow of evening, Omar parked several blocks from the shrine and stepped out into the calm mountain air. For a moment, he looked like any other visitor, quiet, reflective, just another face in the crowd. but inside his backpack rested the weapon he believed would send a message. And as he began walking toward the sound of gathering pilgrims, the course of the night, and the lives of everyone there, was already shifting towards something no one could have imagined. As the last traces of daylight disappeared behind the Rocky Mountains, Marion Springs transformed into something almost otherworldly. The basilica bells struck 8, and with each chime, the anticipation of thousands seemed to rise like a tide. Pilgrims, families, veterans, teenagers, cancer patients, foreign visitors, clustered along the stone pathways leading toward the shrine. Some held their candles close to their chests, whispering quiet prayers. Others stared at the towering white statue of the Virgin Mary on the hillside, its silhouette glowing faintly in the dark. Volunteers moved briskly through the crowd, distributing paper-shielded candles. Sister Angela Ruiz walked the front lines, reminding people to move gently, to keep their flames steady in the breeze, rolling down from the mountains. Near the fountain, an elderly woman from Arizona gently adjusted the blanket around her wheelchair-bound husband, whispering, "This is the night I've been waiting for." A group of teenagers from Texas practiced the chorus of Hail Mary, Gentle Woman, trying not to laugh at how off-key they sounded. The procession began the same way it had for more than a century. One flame lit at the front, passed slowly from candle to candle, until the darkness shimmered with thousands of tiny lights. A river of gold seemed to move across the courtyard, flowing toward the shrine. Choir members lifted their voices, and the first notes of Ave Maria drifted upward like a prayer woven into the night sky. And within that peaceful sea of faces and flickering candles, a single figure watched from the edge. Omar stood beneath a pine tree just outside the lantern-lit path, his hood pulled low, his backpack heavy across his shoulders. No one noticed him. He blended into the shadows easily, just another quiet presence among the many who came to watch. But inside his mind, the calm of the procession only sharpened his anger. Each song felt to him like defiance, each candle like a challenge, each smiling pilgrim like a reminder of everything he believed was wrong with the world. He studied the path carefully. The narrow stone bridge over the creek, barely wide enough for 2 wheelchairs, was the perfect choke point. When the front rows reached that spot, they would slow to a near stop, vulnerable, exposed. A couple beside each IM murmured in awe at the beauty of the evening. Omar barely heard them. His pulse thudded in his ears. His fingers brushed the metal pipe inside his backpack. The procession moved closer. The moment he had been preparing for was just seconds away, and no one in Marion Springs yet realized how close they were to disaster. The front of the candlelight procession was just steps from the narrow stone bridge when the peace of the evening cracked like glass. It happened so fast that many pilgrims didn't understand what they were seeing, not at first. One moment, the choir's voices filled the air. The next, a shadow slipped out from the tree line and planted itself directly in the path of the advancing candles. Several people gasped as Omar Haddad stepped forward, hood falling back, eyes burning with a rage that seemed completely out of place in the gentle glow of the procession. Before anyone could react, he reached into his backpack, pulled out the metal pipe and raised it high above his head. "You will not parade your idolatry in front of us," he shouted, his voice ripping through the singing like a blade. The first rows froze. Candles trembled in shaking hands. A child began to cry. Some thought he was a confused man in distress. Others believed he was drunk. But the truth became clear when he swung the pipe downward with violent force. Not at a person, but at the small statue of the Virgin Mary being carried at shoulder height by 4 men. The sound was sickening, a crack that echoed off the stone walls of the shrine. The statue shuddered under the blow. A second strike shattered her extended hand, sending pieces of white plaster scattering across the ground like bone fragments. Screams erupted. The carriers stumbled backwards. The once unified river of candlelight disintegrated into chaos. A woman from Ohio clutched her rosary to her chest, whispering, "Oh God, please," as she pulled her daughter behind her. A group of elderly pilgrims in wheelchairs tried to retreat, but the narrow path trapped them in place. Candles dropped, flames flickering out or rolling dangerously close to robes and blankets. Sister Angela, hearing the commotion from 20 yards back, fought her way through the crowd with the speed of someone who had trained for emergencies her entire life. "Everyone, remain calm," she shouted, but fear had already spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, Omar advanced again, swinging the pipe in wide arcs, shouting scriptures twisted into anger. His voice carried above the panic. "You disrespect us. You defy God with these images." A man tried to reason with him, hands raised. Omar didn't listen. His eyes were locked on the next group of pilgrims, frail, elderly, unable to move quickly. And in that terrible instant, it became clear to every witness. This was no longer just an outburst. It was an attack. And someone was going to get hurt unless a miracle stopped him. Panic spread across the procession like a shockwave. The moment the statue's broken hand hit the ground, fear seized even the bravest pilgrims. But amid the chaos, two people pushed forward, not out of recklessness, but out of instinct. Sister Angela Ruiz reached the front first. Her sandals slapped against the stone as she maneuvered through the crowd, her voice cutting above the screams. "Do not push. Move slowly. Keep your candles away from clothing." Her training showed. Years of managing thousands of pilgrims had given her the calm of someone who'd seen storms before. Yet even she felt her chest tighten when she saw Omar swinging the pipe just feet from the wheelchair section. One of the wheelchairs held Margaret Doyle, a retired teacher battling lung cancer. Her husband tried to pivot her chair, but there was nowhere to go. The bridge narrowed too sharply. Margaret's trembling hands squeezed his. She whispered, "We're trapped." Then came a sound that would be remembered by every witness. The thud of someone running toward danger instead of away from it. Ethan Miller, the 5-year-old agnostic from Chicago, broke through the chaos like a linebacker cutting through a defensive line. His grandmother, who had begged him to join the pilgrimage, shouted his name, but Ethan was already moving toward the attacker. His face held no anger, only a fierce, urgent clarity. He stopped directly between Omar and the vulnerable pilgrims. "Look at them!" Ethan shouted, hands open, body exposed. "These are grandmothers, disabled folks, patients here to pray. They're not your enemies." For a split second, it seemed Omar hesitated. His grip loosened. His eyes flickered, not with compassion, but with conflict. And then, in one violent motion, he swung the pipe straight at Ethan's head. Ethan ducked at the last possible instant. The metal slammed into his shoulder with a dull, sickening thud that echoed across the courtyard. He staggered but didn't fall. Behind him, Sister Angela cried out, "No, stop!" Several men surged forward to restrain Omar, but he backed toward the stone railing overlooking the creek, wielding the pipe like a cornered animal ready to lash out again. The tension hit a terrifying peak. One wrong move, and someone would be seriously injured, or worse. In that breathless moment, every human effort seemed to fail. Sister Angela's authority, Ethan's courage, the crowd's prayers, and just when violence was seconds away from exploding again, something none of them expected began to unfold. Just as the crowd braced for the next blow, just as the men rushing forward prepared to tackle Omar, and Ethan steadied himself for another strike, the night changed. Not gradually, not subtly. It changed all at once. The candles were still burning, but suddenly they no longer seemed to be the primary source of light. A radiance bloomed over the courtyard, soft but powerful, without a single visible origin point. It wasn't the floodlights from the basilica. It wasn't lanterns or reflections. Witnesses described it later with words that sounded impossible, everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The air thickened, not hotter or colder, but denser, as if something immense had entered the physical space and the atmosphere adjusted in response. Dozens of people felt their breath catch in their throats. Even the babies crying moments before fell into stunned silence. Omar froze mid-motion, pipe raised. The men charging M stopped in their tracks. Sister Angela's hand, reaching forward, hovered in midair. For an instant, the entire procession seemed suspended, caught between fear and awe. And then the light intensified near the hillside shrine, where the large statue of the Virgin Mary stood carved in white stone. Except this was not the statue. The light thickened, folded, and seemed to form itself into a figure. A woman luminous, robed in white and blue, her presence both delicate and overwhelming. Her face carried a peace that defied language, paired with an authority no human voice could imitate. She was not walking, she was moving, gliding toward the bridge without touching the ground. Some witnesses said she appeared translucent. Others insisted she looked solid, as if carved from living light. But all agreed on one thing. Every heart within sight of her changed rhythm. Ethan, clutching his injured shoulder, felt something like an electric warmth surge through him, a presence that seemed to communicate without words. Be still. Omar's eyes widened, the fury inside him rupturing into confusion. He tried to shout, but the sound caught in his throat. His arm trembled. The pipe slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the stone. No one spoke. No one could. The luminous woman, recognized by every believer and even every skeptic as the unmistakable image of Virgin Mary, paused inches from Omar. And in the silent exchange that followed, the impossible began to unfold. The luminous figure stopped just inches from Omar, who stood trembling, caught between terror and disbelief. His breath came in short, broken bursts. The metal pipe he had dropped moments earlier lay at his feet, forgotten. The weapon no longer mattered, because in that impossible light, Omar was not facing a crowd, nor a nun, nor a young man defending strangers. He was facing her. Witnesses later said the Virgin Mary did not speak aloud, yet everyone within a certain distance felt something, an understanding that bypassed thought and went straight into the soul. It was as if the meaning arrived fully formed, without words. No more harm, no more hatred. To some, the air seemed to vibrate with a presence that was at once maternal and commanding. A grandmother from New Mexico swore she felt the same force she had felt years ago while praying alone during chemotherapy, a love that wrapped itself around her like a shield. Ethan, holding his swollen shoulder, felt tears sting his eyes for reasons he couldn't explain. It was like she looked at all of us, he would later tell reporters. But at him, especially at him, Omar's face contorted, shifting through disbelief, anger, denial. And then something broke. Not with violence, but with surrender. His knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed, hands covering his face, sobs breaking from him in raw, unfiltered waves. It wasn't the cry of a man cornered or defeated. It was the cry of someone witnessing a truth too powerful to fight. The glow around the Virgin Mary seemed to soften as she moved closer. There was no judgment in her radiance, only sorrow for the suffering inside him. Those watching felt it clearly. She was not condemning him. She was calling him out of the darkness he had built around himself. A teenager on the left side of the bridge whispered, "She's forgiving him." His mother held his hand tightly, too stunned to respond. Omar's sobs grew louder, echoing across the stone courtyard. His fingers dug into the ground as though trying to anchor himself. I'm sorry, he repeated, though no one had asked him to speak. His words seemed ripped out from the deepest part of him, the part that had been buried for years beneath anger and ideology. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the Virgin Mary's light began to withdraw slowly, like sunlight fading after a storm. Her presence receded, not vanishing but returning to where it had always been, unseen yet undeniably real. When the darkness settled again, and only the candles remained, the man who had come to destroy the procession no longer looked like the same person. The hatred was gone, and in its place was something shattered and ready to be remade. When the Virgin Mary's radiance faded and the night returned to its ordinary darkness, the courtyard of Marion Springs was left in a stunned, trembling silence. Candles flickered. People stared at each other with wide, disbelieving eyes. Some clutched rosaries to their chests. Others simply held their breath, wondering whether they had all witnessed the same impossible event. But the quiet didn't last long. Within minutes, phones came out. Videos were uploaded. Messages spread like wildfire through group chats, church networks, and social media platforms. By midnight, the story had escaped Colorado and was shooting across the entire country under headlines like "Miracle in Marion Springs," "Muslim man attacks procession, then light appears." Did hundreds witness the Virgin Mary? The next morning, news crews descended on the town. Satellite vans lined the narrow streets. Reporters stood outside the shrine, broadcasting live to millions. Some spoke cautiously about a mysterious light phenomenon. Others openly used the word miracle, their voices tinged with awe. The Catholic Church responded quickly but carefully. Bishop Lawrence Mitchell issued a statement urging calm, promising a formal inquiry, and reminding the faithful that extraordinary claims require patient discernment. Still, he couldn't hide the emotion in his eyes when he told journalists, "Something profound happened here. I felt it myself." Meanwhile, skeptics mobilized with equal energy. Scientists, psychologists, and atheist organizations announced plans to investigate. Cable news panels debated everything from mass hysteria to drone interference to atmospheric anomalies. A physics professor from UCLA insisted the light must have been a natural optical distortion amplified by panic, though he admitted he had no clear explanation for the synchronized freeze described by hundreds of eyewitnesses. On social media, the divide was immediate. Believers posted testimonies, prayers, and slowed-down footage searching for details. Critics dissected angles, lighting, audio, insisting that people were seeing what they wanted to see. Yet there was one thing neither side could ignore: the attacker himself. When Omar Haddad was led away in handcuffs, he didn't fight, he didn't scream, he didn't claim justification. He wept openly, uncontrollably, as though he had been shattered from the inside. And for many watching, that transformation was harder to explain than the light itself, because violence had been hours in the making. But whatever stopped it had happened in a single unbroken moment. In the days following the attack, the nation's attention shifted from the miraculous to the procedural. Omar Haddad, once a nameless young man from Denver, now sat in a county holding cell as the justice system prepared to unravel what had happened. Yet even within those walls, something about him seemed changed. Officers who processed him later reported the same observation. He offered no resistance, no excuses, only apologies whispered under his breath, as if to someone only he could see. Investigators expected defiance or ideological justification. Instead, during his first interview, Omar spoke clearly, quietly, and without hesitation. "I planned the attack. I know what I intended to do," he admitted. "But what stopped me, I don't have words for." When pressed to explain the light or the figure he claimed to see, he didn't argue, didn't dramatize, didn't attempt to defend himself. "I know how it sounds," he said, "but I cannot pretend it didn't happen." Because his testimony included descriptions of a supernatural event, a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation was mandatory. Dr. Alan Pierce, a forensic psychiatrist with 20 years of experience, conducted multiple sessions with Omar. His final report stunned both prosecutors and defense attorneys. "Omar exhibits no signs of psychosis, delusion, or hallucinatory disorder," he wrote. "His reasoning is coherent. His memory is intact. He describes the experience as external, not internal, a distinction atypical of hallucinations. More strikingly, he displays acute remorse and moral clarity uncommon for his psychological profile just days earlier." While the court evaluated mental fitness, the Catholic Church launched its own inquiry. A team of theologians and investigators from the Archdiocese interviewed more than 50 witnesses and reviewed every available video. Their confidential preliminary findings leaked within hours read, "Though no definitive conclusion can yet be drawn, the convergence of testimonies and the sudden behavioral transformation of the assailant merit deeper investigation into the possibility of supernatural intervention." Skeptics, however, were equally active. A consortium of scientists proposed atmospheric refraction, heightened emotional stress, or mass suggestion as explanations. A popular atheist commentator claimed the event was collective misinterpretation fueled by fear. But when asked about Omar's dramatic shift, he faltered. "Human psychology is complex." As the case moved toward trial, one truth emerged. The law could prosecute actions. Science could debate causes. The church could discern miracles. But none of them, judge, doctor, bishop, or skeptic, could fully explain why a man consumed by rage had collapsed into tears the moment light touched him. And that unanswered question hovered over everything still to come. When Omar Haddad finally stood before the Colorado District Court, the courtroom was silent enough to hear the hum of the lights overhead. Reporters expected fiery rhetoric or ideological defiance. Instead, Omar faced the judge with his hands clasped, shoulders lowered, and voice steady. "I came to Marion Springs with hate in my heart," he said. "I was wrong. What happened that night broke something inside me and showed me what I had become." Judge Rebecca Collins studied him for a long moment. The prosecution, acknowledging the unprecedented circumstances, offered a plea deal: 3 years suspended, 5 years probation, mandatory counseling, and community service with interfaith organizations in Denver. Omar accepted without negotiation. He asked only for one request before sentencing: a meeting with Sister Angela Ruiz. The meeting took place in a quiet room at the shrine office. Omar entered with visible shame, eyes lowered. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered, "but I needed to tell you I'm sorry, to your face." Sister Angela watched him, her expression neither soft nor harsh, simply present. "Forgiveness isn't mine alone to give," she told him, "but I do forgive you. And the fact that you're standing here asking for reconciliation, that's already the beginning of grace." From that day forward, Omar carried that moment like a compass. His court-mandated work at the Denver Interfaith Dialogue Center began awkwardly. Some volunteers avoided him, others confronted him, but Omar never defended his past. Instead, he shared it raw and unedited, with at-risk youth drifting toward the same online extremism that once trapped him. His story didn't come from textbooks or lectures. It came from lived failure, regret, and a moment of supernatural interruption he still struggled to put into words. One teenager, on the verge of joining a radical chat group, later said, "I listened because he didn't pretend. He told us the truth about what hate turns you into." On September 14th, 2026, exactly 1 year later, Omar returned quietly to Marion Springs for the anniversary procession. He wore no hood, carried no weapon, only silence. When the candles reached the stone bridge, the entire procession stopped for a moment of prayer. Tears streamed down Omar's face, not of guilt, but of gratitude. An imam from Denver approached him afterward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What you do with the rest of your life," he said, "that is your testimony." And perhaps that was the miracle's true legacy. Not the light, not the vision, but the transformation that followed. If this story moved you, consider liking this video and subscribing to Touched by Mary to hear more powerful testimonies of faith, mercy, and the miracles still happening in our world today.